Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In this series of lectures, I've been talking about different aspects about the book Al-Kafi and its author, Shaykh Al-Kulaini. And more than not, I've been speaking kind of around the whole subject of Ahadith and trying to give you a sense of a perspective in a way to prepare you for, inshallah, benefiting more from this book Al-Kafi. Let me recap quickly what we've done so far so we can move forward with a little bit of background. So I introduced to you the book Al-Kafi, I introduced the author, then we spoke about Ahadith, I emphasized the importance of studying Ahadith. We talked about the history of how Ahadith have come to us, all the way from the time of the Prophet down to someone like Shaykh Al-Kulaini and then eventually to us as well. I broached the subject of different problems that we face when we're dealing with ahadith and some of the solutions that our scholars have developed to try to sort through and find the truth, or at least the most reliable information we can from conflicting, contradictory ahadith. And another issue that we talked about was the reliability and authenticity of ahadith, the whole issue of that, what defines that, how can we attain a level of confidence in traditions. What I'd like to do today is to address maybe more your own personal kind of benefits that you'll derive from reading ahadith. So before, in a previous lecture, I talked about the benefits that we as Muslims derive from ahadith and how ahadith are really the counterpart to the Quran in terms of our access to Islamic knowledge. That was kind of on a global scale as Muslims. Today I want to speak more about your benefit as a non-specialist. Right, those of you who are not scholars, who don't have seminary training to be able to access the ahadith at a scholarly level, you can still derive great benefit from reading ahadith. And so I want to speak about what those benefits are and give you a lot of examples from the ahadith to really kind of whet your appetite for this kind of study. First of all, I'm going to focus on two main benefits. Probably in this lecture I'll speak about one, and in the subsequent lecture I'll speak about this one other major benefit. Today's benefit is I want us to view or think about ahadith as almost like a commentary on the fatwas of our mujtahids. Now let me explain the terms so we're on the same page. So a mujtahid is a legal scholar, a jurist, somebody who has trained and really steeped himself in knowledge and is able now to derive laws from the Islamic sources, from the primary sources of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet and the Imams. The process that he goes through is called ijtihad. Right, he goes through a process where he's examining the primary sources that deal with a particular question, and he comes away with a ruling that he can justify, that he feels is has integrity and that he can stand by. That opinion that he arrives at is known as a fatwa. Right? A fatwa is just a legal opinion of a qualified jurist. Now, those of us who are not specialists, who are not mujtahids ourselves, our duty is to refer to a qualified mujtahid. Right? We term that the person that we refer to, we call him a marji' taqlid. All right. So that's in its own place. Now what I'm saying is that if we kind of try to retrace the steps of the mujtahid, right? So he's done his work. He's come up with a particular opinion, a particular fatwa. Right now, if we retrace his steps and read the ahadith, knowing the conclusion, knowing his conclusion and the conclusion that we have to abide by, right, we'll be able to enlighten ourselves on certain aspects of that opinion, and I think it'll be really beneficial for us. And let me highlight some of those benefits. One of the things that happens when you do this, when you go through this process and kind of retrace the steps of the mujtahid, is that you end up reconnecting with the true source of the of that legal ruling, and that is the Prophet and the Imam. Right? I remember this experience for myself, especially when I first started in my studies. I was involved with our Sunni brothers, and oftentimes I would hear people in our Sunni communities. They would say, for instance, they do a particular act, they pray a particular way or do a particular thing because it's the Sunnah of the Prophet. And their reasoning or their basis for what they did, at least according to their own thought process, was that they're doing it because it's the Sunnah of the Prophet. Whereas as Shia, one of the things that's happened in our culture, which is it's not a bad thing, but I think we can keep the system but remedy it at the same time. We tend to say that I'm doing something because it's the fatwa of my mujtahid, which is, again, not a bad thing. That's exactly how it should be. We should be doing things because it's gone through this correct filter of ijtihad, and I'm doing it because my mujtahid has determined that that's the best particular route to take to please God. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with that system, but it feels wrong. It feels wrong to stand in front of a Sunni. A Sunni says, I'm praying with my, I don't know, let's take any issue. I'm praying without using a turba because it's the sunnah of the Prophet. Or let's take a better example. I pray with my hands folded like this because it's the sunnah of the Prophet, he claims. And I say, no, I pray with my hands down. Why? Because it's the fatwa of my mujtahid. Right, just in what the sound of that sounds like it's a no-brainer that the sunnah of the Prophet trumps anyone else's opinion. Right, that's not the reality. The opinion of the mujtahid is based on the sunnah of the Prophet. So by reading the ahadith, we can get that sense, kind of re-ground ourselves in the ultimate source of the fatwa of our mujtahid, which is actually the sunnah of the Prophet, the sunnah of the Ahlul Bayt. Right, so I think that's a very important thing to know, so that we can then say that I pray in a certain way, I act in a certain way because it's the sunnah of the Ahlul Bayt, because it's the sunnah of the Prophet, knowing that I'm doing it because my mujtahid has told me, but also knowing that the source of that fatwa is something much higher and much loftier. All right. A second benefit when we read the ahadith, kind of in light of the fatwa of our mujtahid, is that we will come to realize some of the reasons why mujtahids have different opinions. That's always a troubling thing for non-specialists, especially if they haven't studied much and don't know much about the process of ijtihad and how laws are arrived at. They feel troubled by the fact that there are different opinions of different maraju' taqleed on the same issue. And they feel like, well, the Quran is one, why can't they all, the Ahlul Bayt are one, why can't they all agree on a particular thing? What you'll see is when you start reading ahadith, again, knowing the fatwa, knowing the final answer, but now you start reading ahadith, you see that in the ahadith, there are reasons for different opinions. There are conflicts within the ahadith, contradictions within the ahadith, and you can start to understand that, this is why some people favor this side and some people favor this side. And I get a sense for the fact that each side might be justified in having a different opinion, and each one has its own reasons. Right, it's not a conflict, but it's an intellectual process that's been that people have mujtahids have engaged in, and they've come up with, to their mind, in good judgment, the best opinion that they can arrive at. So let me give you an example of the way this might play out. Let's take the example of the ghusl that is recommended for the day of Jum'ah, for the day of Friday. Right, so let me share some ahadith and I'll translate them for you. One hadith, for instance, from Imam Sadiq says, الغسل يوم الجمعة على الرجال والنساء في الحضر وعلى الرجال في السفر وليس على النساء في السفر. All right, so he says that the taking this ghusl, this ritual bath on the day of Friday, is an obligation for men and women, whether they're traveling or whether they're at a place of residence. But for women, he says, if when they're traveling, then it's an exception that they don't have to engage in it. Another hadith says, for instance, from Imam Rida alayhi salam, somebody asked him about the ghusl of Jum'ah. He says, wajibun ala kulli dhakarin aw untha abdin aw hur. That the ghusl is wajib, he says, on every male and female, whether he's free or enslaved. Another hadith from Imam Al-Baqir alayhi salam says, لا تدع الغسل يوم الجمعة فإنه سنة. And then he says, following he says, الغسل واجب يوم الجمعة. Right, so this also emphasizes that it's a wajib act. Right, so the language of that, when you read that, you realize, wow, that's a lot of emphasis that's being put on this particular ghusl. But then we come to another hadith where a person asks Abu al-Hasan al-Awwal, so Imam al-Kazim alayhi salam, كيف صار غسل يوم الجمعة واجبا? How is it that we came about this idea that the ghusl of Friday is wajib? So the Imam says, إن الله أتم صلاة الفريضة بصلاة النافلة. Right? Allah has kind of perfected the institution of wajib prayers by instituting mustahab prayers, nafila prayers that we can do to reach an even higher level in our prayers. وَأَتَمَّ الصِّيَامَ الْفَرِيضَ بِصِيَامِ النَّافِلَةِ. And he's taken the wajib institution of fasting, and he's perfected it with mustahab fasts. So to go over and above, there are mustahab fasts also there in the Sharia. And then he says, وَأَتَمَّ وُضُوءَ النَّافِلَةِ بِغُسْلِ يَوْمِ الْجُمُعَةِ. And he's perfected the wudu, the mustahab wudu that we do. It's mustahab to maintain your wudu on a continuous basis to the extent that you can. So he's perfected that by instituting the ghusl of Friday. All right. So what we see is all this, the previous ahadith, actually most of the ahadith that we have, they use the term wajib and never abandon this ghusl and these sorts of things, which makes it seem like, it's an obligation. It would be a sin to leave it off. This last hadith, on the other hand, lets us know that no, it's actually just mustahab. It's only a recommended act, and even if you were to leave it off, it would be okay. We wouldn't be committing a sin at least. And the reason is because he says that, it's by comparison, right? He said that certain wajib acts were perfected by certain mustahab acts, and then he says that the ghusl of Jumu'ah is like a perfection of a mustahab act. So if the wudu itself is mustahab, then the ghusl, which is the perfection of the mustahab, is also going to be a mustahab. Right, so that's a complicated process, but my idea is, and my point is that by looking at the ahadith, then you start to realize that, now I see why some of our muraj' taqlid, at least in the past, used to give fatwas that it's wajib to do ghusl al-jum'ah, and why some say it's mustahab. There's a difference of opinion, and I see how that's rooted in the ahadith themselves. Another benefit of doing this process and kind of retracing the footsteps of our maraji' in their process of ijtihad, this is the third benefit I'm mentioning, is that we start to realize that many of the opinions of the mujtahids are not necessarily their own. Actually, they're not their own. Right? When they give an opinion, you'll start to realize that, this isn't something he's just come up with by himself. He's just kind of invented on his own. I see that the ahadith actually say exactly what the mujtahid is saying. And many times even the wording of the fatwa is very, very similar to the wording of the hadith of the imams. Again, let me give you some examples of this. There's one issue in our legal rulings about what you can do sajda on. Right, so typically now, as Shia, we do sajda on the turba of Imam Hussein. The fatwa itself reads like this. This is just as an example. I'm going to read Sayyid Sistani's fatwa. He says, يُعْتَبَرُ فِي مَسْجَدِ الْجَبْهَةِ أَن يَكُونَ مِنَ الْأَرْضِ أَوْ نَبَاتِهَا. He says the place where you do sajda and you put your forehead down, it must be from the earth itself or something that grows from the earth. And then the second fatwa, he says, يُعْتَبَرُ فِي جَوَازِ السُّجُودِ عَلَى النَّبَاتِ أَنْ لَا يَكُونَ مَأْكُولًا. If you choose to do something that grows from the earth, then it must be something that's not eaten. Okay, and then he continues and he says, in addition, it should also not be something that's normally worn. All right, so he's given us these four kind of elements. One is it must be the earth itself, or something that grows from the earth, but it can't be something that's eaten or worn. So you might look at that and think, well, where do you get all of these ideas? Why all these caveats and conditions for something so simple as where we do sajda? But then you look at the hadith, and the hadith says the following. Hisham ibn Hakam says, he said to Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam, أخبرني عما يجوز السجود عليه وعما لا يجوز. And he asks him, he says, tell me upon what is it permissible for me to do sajda, and upon what is it not permissible for me to do sajda. So the Imam says, السجود لا يجوز إلا على الأرض أو على ما أنبتت الأرض إلا ما أكل أو لبس. So the Imam's answer is exactly what we saw in Sayyid Sistani's fatwa, that it's not permissible to do sajda on anything except for the earth itself, or what the earth puts forth, what grows from the earth, except what's eaten or what's worn. Right? So all of a sudden you start to realize, this isn't something that the mujtahid has made up, but I see exactly in the words of the Imam, he's also said the same thing. And so it gives us that sense of closeness to the Imams. It gives us a renewed confidence in the fatwas of our mujtahideen, that they are indeed deriving these laws from the sources themselves. One other benefit I want to focus on is if you've noticed when you read the laws of the legal rulings of our mujtahids, in many cases they'll end up, instead of giving us a firm opinion and saying this is what you must do or this is what you must not do, they'll give a precautionary measure. Right? We term it ihtiyat wajib. Right? They'll say it's as an obligation, as a precaution, you must do such and such. Let me just explain what that means before I show the benefit of the ahadith. There's one time when the mujtahid comes to a conclusion that he feels confident in. He feels like he could stand by it and face God with that conclusion based on the evidence. In that circumstance, he'll generally give a fatwa, an opinion, and say, according to my opinion, it's wajib to do this or it's haram to do such and such. In other circumstances, he doesn't feel like he has that level of confidence. Right? He's looked at all the sources. There's still some questions, possibly maybe the evidence is not conclusive, and so what he'll do is he'll give a precautionary measure. He'll say, well, I don't know exactly where the red line is, but if I know that if you do such and such, if you do this much, then you've definitely covered all your bases and you haven't left off anything. Right? So he'll give us a kind of a precaution like that. So sometimes, again, people wonder, why take a precaution like that? Why can't you just give your conclusion, and why do you have to make it complicated like that by giving precautions and things like that? So again, let me give you an example from our Sharia. So we have an issue about the timing for the prayer, for the Maghrib prayer. And so our Sunni brothers, for instance, will pray as soon as the sun sets below the western horizon. But as Shia, we typically we wait and sometimes in the order of 10 to 15 minutes longer until the redness from the eastern horizon goes away. And then, only then do we break our fast, or only then do we say our Maghrib prayer. The opinion, at least of some of the maraji', of Sayyid Sistani, for instance, it's like this. He says, based on a precautionary stance, we have to wait past the time of the actual sunset in the west until the redness from the eastern horizon goes away. So he gives it as a precaution. So let me share some of the ahadith about this, and then you'll start to see why he doesn't give a firm opinion, but gives this precautionary measure. So we have, for instance, from Imam Al-Baqir alayhi salam, he says, إِذَا غَابَتِ الْحُمْرَةُ مِنْ هَذَا الْجَانِبِ يعني من المشرق فقد غابت الشمس من شرق الأرض وغربها. He says, when the redness goes from this side, and he's pointing to the eastern horizon, when the redness goes from the eastern side, then you can be sure that the sun has definitely set on the western side. Right, so the idea is this, that when the sun sets, you might have cloud cover on the western horizon, which makes it seem like the sun has set when actually it's just behind the clouds and not yet kind of below the horizon. You might have mountains, for instance, or whatever else. So you might think that the sun is set, but it's not actually set. But if you use the standard of looking at the eastern horizon and waiting for the redness to go from there, once the redness is gone from the eastern horizon, then you can be sure that the sun has indeed set. But it takes a little bit longer. You have to wait a little bit longer before that redness goes away from the opposite horizon, the eastern one. And there are many ahadith. Let me share another one from Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam. A companion says, سمعته يقول وقت المغرب إذا ذهبت الحمرة من المشرق. He says that the time for Maghrib is when the redness goes from the eastern side, the eastern horizon. And then he gives some more details. But then we have some ahadith that say the following. A person says that he heard Imam As-Sadiq say, سمعت يقول وقت المغرب إذا غربت الشمس فغاب قرصها. In another hadith it says the time for Maghrib is when the sun itself sets in the west. When the sun is hidden below the horizon, then it's time for Maghrib. That sounds exactly like what our Sunni brothers do. Or another hadith that says a similar thing. وقت المغرب إذا غاب القرص فإن رأيت بعد ذلك وقد صليت أعدت الصلاة ومضى صومك وتكف عن الطعام. He continues. But this also says that when the sun sets in the west, that's when you can pray. That's when you can break your fast. Then if you realize, actually it hadn't set and it was just cloud cover, then you have to go back and pray again, or continue your fast, kind of renew your intention or something like that. All right, so we have conflicting ahadith. Some say that the setting of the sun in the west is enough. Others say no, you have to wait until the redness goes on the eastern horizon. Okay, so if a mujtahid comes to he looks at all the ahadith and he sees that, for instance, there's strong ahadith on both sides. If you think about the relationship of these two opinions, say if you say your prayer, or even more important, if you break your fast as soon as the sun sets, but it happens to be wrong. What if Allah's intention was actually that no, we should wait until the eastern horizon's redness goes away? Then here you've done something haram. You've broken a fast where you're not supposed to break it. But if you wait, even if that opinion was correct, but you ended up waiting as a precaution for 10 more minutes or 15 more minutes, you haven't done anything wrong. So the precautionary stance, the safest route when we have these conflicting, in this particular issue, when we have these conflicting views, is to go with the later of the two times, to wait the extra 10, 15 minutes until the redness is gone. And then if you say your prayers, then if you break your fast, then you're definitely safe. You've covered all your bases and you haven't done anything wrong. Even if the opinions of the Sunnis, the opinion of the Sunnis happens to be the correct opinion, we still haven't done anything wrong. Right? So that kind of gives you a sense of, oh, now I understand why there is a difference and why he took a precautionary stance instead of giving a firm opinion. Now, let me just comment on a couple of things. This process that I've described, it's not exactly a simple process. Finding all these ahadith, knowing which ahadith to present to you, it was a little bit of an involved process. And so it's not necessarily something that a non-specialist can easily do. But I do kind of envision down the road maybe having a risala out there that actually gives you the fatwa of your mujtahid, along with at least those clear ahadith that are linked to that are the basis for the fatwa. Right? So at least in some instances where there's a clear indication and a clear piece of evidence that is the basis for the fatwa, at least in those instances we can present the hadith so that you can benefit not only from the fatwa and the conclusion, but also the source of that. Some of the reasons why it's a little complicated for non-specialists, one is that some of these legal opinions that the mujtahid comes to are not based on kind of clear traditions. They might be based on kind of complex deduction processes where he's had to evaluate many things and kind of read between the lines and these sorts of things. So it might not be so easy just to find a particular hadith that matches up on a one-to-one basis with a fatwa. That's sometimes a problem for the layperson. Sometimes also the fatwas of the mujtahids are not based on ahadith in particular, but are based on more general principles, and there are complex legal processes that they have to go through to derive those opinions. So again, reading a hadith is not going to help us to understand the fatwa any better. One last note I want to focus on, this is really important, that you don't come away with what I've said so far as an indication that somehow the study of ahadith is going to make you no longer have any need for ijtihad or a mujtahid. Right? Having a book of ahadith at your disposal, having, for instance, Al-Kafi or Wasa'il al-Shia, even if it were translated in the future and in your hands, you have a great translation in front of you, that's never going to replace the need that we have for a mujtahid. Simply reading a hadith is not the same thing, even if you understand it, is not going to be the same thing as having a comprehensive knowledge of all the pieces of evidence, and knowing the process, having a systematic way of sorting through all of that. Right? There's a lot more that goes into the process of ijtihad than simply being able to read one hadith and translate it and go off and start acting on it. So just that should be a definite red line that you don't want to cross. And really, it would be almost like, sometimes you have these websites or apps that give you the power to kind of diagnose certain illnesses that you might have. So you can put in different symptoms that you're facing, and it'll come out with different possibilities for diagnosis. It would be like taking that to your doctor and second guessing your doctor based on the outcome of this app. Right? With all of his training, all of his expertise, now you're using an app that you've just punched in some things with absolutely no intelligence, no background, and you're saying, well, I think your diagnosis is wrong because this app says contrary to what you're saying. Right? That's basically what we would be doing if we were to take a fatwa, fake a hadith, and say, I challenge my mujtahid because here's a hadith that says something that's contrary to his fatwa. Right? It would be a very kind of silly way of arguing a point. So have humility, even if you have access to the ahadith. Realize that you need to have humility and respect the work that has gone into coming up with a fatwa, but still benefit from the hadith in order to give that color, give that background, and that grounding that we want, so that we feel connected to the source of our laws, which are the Ahlul Bayt and the Prophet himself. Inshallah, I'll talk a little bit in the next lecture about some other benefits that we can derive from reading Ahadith. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.